The first thing we need to do is let go of what we expect life to be like. And we can't always do that in the middle of the acute trauma that we're experiencing. But as we start to have our Bible open, cry out to God in our pain, as we start to do those things and continue to open up the possibilities that God is going to do some things in your circumstances, then I think we can start to let go of what we might think that should look like. What are you going to do with this now, Lord? He's a God of
Yeah.
possibilities. He can meet any impossibility and make a possibility in it.
Welcome back to Living the Grace Life. I'm your host, Jennifer Sakata, and you've made your way to the corner of real grace for your real life. How do we trust God for good when everything looks so wrong? How do we hold on to hope when our world is falling apart? It's easy to forget the goodness of God when the brokenness in our world feels louder and bigger than hope, doesn't it? That's why I am thrilled to welcome my guest today. Julie Sunne writes about finding real hope amid life's real struggles. Her own struggles include enduring multiple miscarriages and now caregiving for her adult daughter who has significant intellectual disabilities. Julie is the author of Everyday Praise, Walking in Greater Peace, and most recently, Sometimes I Forget, 60 Reminders of Hope for Your Hard Days. She and her husband David are parents to 3 grown sons and a daughter. They reside with their daughter in rural Northeast Iowa. Julie, welcome to Living the Grace Life.
This is wonderful, Jennifer. We've been trying to get connected and now we are. So I'm excited.
I know. Sometimes it takes a little bit, but this is a good space.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about Iowa, Julie. I've been up to the Quad Cities, and I know you live outside of the Quad Cities, not too far from here, but what is happening in Iowa these days? I only ever drive through quickly.
I'm from Eastern Iowa, so around the Dubuque area, and I'm currently live about an hour west of there. My husband and I, he was a park ranger most of our married
Oh,
life. Yes, so we lived in state parks, so we traveled around the different corners of the state through our married lives. Where I grew up, it was very hilly, right along the Mississippi River, very hilly. I know a lot of people think of corn and pigs for Iowa, but that's mostly just the north central or central part of Iowa. And then if you go out to the west, just covered with prairie. It's known as the Luss Hills, and so it's a little
oh,
bit shorter prairie. And Iowa is bordered on east and west by Mississippi and Missouri River. So there's a lot of people dismiss it, but I think every state holds some really unique and wonderful places.
oh, that sounds beautiful. I'm glad I asked because that makes me want to come to Iowa even more. I
Please
just
do.
love that.
My
Oh, that's
door's open.
wonderful. Okay, I might take you up on that.
That is why.
Julie, you have an incredible story of hope amid life's hard. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you first came to walk with the Jesus in your journey.
And yeah, I was born and raised in the church. So I've always known God as sovereign and creator. That's just always been, I never doubted that. My childhood was quite, I wouldn't say an easy childhood, but there wasn't the trauma. We worked hard. I grew up on a dairy farm, had 5 siblings. So we did our normal fighting and nothing real. My parents were loving. There was nothing real dramatic or traumatic that happened in my life. So I I guess I came to expect that I would get married and life would just go along like it always did. We would work hard, of course. Nothing is just naturally given to you, but I felt like we would just work hard and then things would go well. And when after we got married, we decided to wait a few years to have our family. And then when we decided it was time, we fully expected I would have my 7 or 8 or whatever number of children I wanted, and they would be yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am.
Did you discover that to be true? Because I want to go to that universe.
Yeah, exactly. I just expected, sure, we might have some normal ups and downs, but nothing too bad. It didn't turn out that way. My first pregnancy ended in miscarriage, and that one, it rocked my world, Jennifer. I was totally unprepared for handling the hard things that come in life, the challenging things in life. I really was not prepared for that. And I wasn't prepared to reconcile the God that I knew with the bad things that can happen in life. I never had to, and so I was very ill-equipped to do that. Spent a while pushing God away, and he continued to love me and continued to woo me, I guess I would say, and minister to me in the way that I needed to be ministered to. So in my deep depression after that first miscarriage, he met me in a dream and showed me my beautiful little girl. I lost her fairly early. I could not have scientifically known she was a girl. At least I did not know that. Nobody revealed
Yes.
that. We didn't have any tests done that told us that. I'm sure DNA could have, but we did not have that done. But I just, in my spirit, I sensed that she was a little girl. And I had already named her Sarah. Now, I did not tell anybody that. But in my dream, the Lord was holding her up for me to see. And at that point, she appeared to be about 3 months old, a 3-month-old baby or so. And he just imparted to me that she was fine. He had her. And basically, I have Sarah. She's fine. She's here with me. Now you need to get up and move. After that dream, something shifted a little bit. It was a slow realization that there was more to this God than I had thought because I was so angry that I had dismissed him. And so that was enough for me to say, there's some possibility here. There's more to God than I know. And I need to figure what that might be out. So I did. I started getting up. I started having a little bit of hope again, started going on with life. And then I got pregnant with my firstborn at that time. And I had 2 boys fairly quickly. We did have a short period of infertility within that time as well, maybe like a year of infertility. But then after that, I had the 2 boys really close together. They were about 15 and a half, 16 months apart. My firstborn was born with a disabled arm, and he was whisked away at birth. They weren't quite sure what was causing it, that it might be some infection that might go to his heart or his, brain or something. And so they were very concerned. So he got whisked away from me very early, and I was dealing with a rash, so I couldn't even go see him. Like I couldn't travel with him. I ended up checking myself out of the hospital early, probably before I should have, because I couldn't stand it.
We do those things. You
Yeah,
can't keep a
get
mama
out of my
down.
way.
Exactly.
And it turned out we ended up having, over his years of life, he ended up having several surgeries, and we were trying to get his growth plates had quit growing in his arm. And they don't really even know. They think something happened in utero that caused these issues with his arm. And it still isn't fully functioning, but he is doing wonderfully. Just got married 2 weeks ago now.
So
So thank
congratulations.
you.
More
Thank you.
family.
Yes, yes. But then after the 2 boys, I experienced 2 more miscarriages. Then I had another birth, and then I had 2 more miscarriages, and then our final son. And so what was happening with my faith was I was willing to give God a chance again, as if he needs my permission to give him a chance. But my faith was still on my circumstances. It was based on my circumstances. Yes, I knew he was there, but it was all when I had those boys, when my circumstances were going well, and I could even handle the difficulties that we went through with Daniel. That wasn't as difficult for me as I was able to handle those without too much difficulty and still trust God. But it was when I lost the next baby and then the next baby and then, the final 2, that it was just like a roller coaster faith. It was so unsettled. When I read the passage about having a foundation that's rock solid, that's built on the rock of Jesus versus building it on the sand, it makes so much sense to me because my faith was so much based on the sand. And that sand would just erode away when I had my next miscarriage. It would just erode away. But it never quite eroded as far as it had before. So I would come back a little bit stronger the next time the Lord allowed a baby. My faith was just a little bit more. I knew him just a little bit more. So he was walking with me through these roller coaster emotions. He never gave up on me. And it wasn't until as I continued to walk with him and continue to process what suffering looks like with a good God, or how a good God can be in even the suffering of life. It took
Let's
all of that to get me to where a faith was built a little bit more solidly on Christ himself.
Yes, I love that you have shared the journey and the process of your faith, because I think often we think that having faith in Jesus is a one and done. We make our decision, right? We tell Jesus that we accept him as God's son, that we accept the forgiveness of our sins, and that we give him our life and choose to follow him, and then we move on our merry way. But what I'm hearing you talk about, Julie, is that this process, really sanctification is what you're talking about. It's this process of growing one step at a time closer to God. And what I love about your story is that God is not standing distant from you, pointed the finger saying, why don't you get this yet? But instead, what I'm hearing is this wooing. I think that was the word you used
Yeah.
earlier, of his wooing coming back to you again and
Yeah.
again, revealing a little bit more of himself each time with an
Yeah.
invitation for you to take his hand, to come alongside
Yeah.
and to trust him just a little bit more. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when the Lord saves us, when he grants us salvation, like you said, so many of us Christians stop there. And our salvation is an amazing gift, but it doesn't end there. We are still sinful, and we always will be until we get to heaven. We're always going to fail. We're always going to fall back. And I know how faithful he is. I know that. But the reason I wrote the book that we're going to be talking about here in a bit is because I forget that. I forget his faithfulness. And we don't always see it in the moment. The first thing that we have to do is let go of those expectations. When we're saved, we expect that all of a sudden everything is going, we're going to be responding properly and God is going to be responding to us. And we put God in this cookie cutter box because it's based on how we were raised, what we understand about him, and what we expect life to be.
Right.
Look around and we see the beauty of the perfection of other people's lives. And social media has just expanded this and extended this hugely. Because what do we see? We see the polished version, right?
Right.
So I might look at you and think, oh, Jennifer has it all together and everything is going so good. So she must be doing the right things. And so I can expect, if I do the right things, I can expect my life to go that way. But the Lord doesn't work that way. He isn't a vendor machine God. We can't just put in our tithing, our good acts, our good deeds, our time in the word. We can't just put those things in as our coins and expect that we get back exactly what we want to get back.
You have experienced multiple miscarriages, and this is a sisterhood no one wants entrance to. No one asks for an invitation to this sisterhood, right? And so part of the faithfulness of God is the fact that he recognizes the grief that takes place in us. And so it isn't this, I am a follower of Jesus. I've had a miscarriage. I'm going to wake up the next day and everything is going to be sunshine and roses because God. But what I'm hearing in your story is that God's faithfulness is beyond our circumstances. Whether you have a live birth or whether you have to say goodbye too soon, God's presence, he is there with you in the midst of every single one of those moments. And he is never once asking you to pretend there's anything unreal about that grief or that loss or that difficulty.
Absolutely. We have to allow ourselves to grieve because our faith is not going to grow. Our faith is not going to get stronger. And we're not going to be trusting God more if we pretend. That's not how we're.
Julie, let's jump into your book because as you're talking, I keep thinking about our unrealistic expectations. Those are grounded in who we are. But your book, Sometimes I Forget, 60 Reminders of Hope, is all about celebrating God's attributes and God's characteristics so that they inform ours. Tell us a little bit, where did this book come from and why did you write it?
So, along with my miscarriages, our daughter, our only daughter, third child, third live birth, was born with significant global disabilities. And global, I mean affecting many different aspects of her person. We found out she had a cleft of the soft palate. So her lips weren't affected, but it was away in the back of the roof of her mouth. So she couldn't get suction to drink. But that's all we thought at the time. And then slowly it was revealed she quit breathing at 6 weeks. We found out she had heart anomalies and a reflex issue. And just slowly her development didn't keep up. I had already had two boys. And so I knew what her development was. So slowly it revealed itself that this was going to be a lifelong disability, some of it genetic. We don't have a diagnosis for her. We had one when she was about, I don't know, between 2 and 4, and they rescinded that. And finally, we got to the point where it didn't matter so much. So we do not have a diagnosis right now for her, but it's some sort of a genetic syndrome. And she is at 26, she lives with us. We're caregiver for her. And she functions at about a 3-year-old level, sometimes a little bit above, sometimes a little bit below, depending on what she's doing. She's functionally nonverbal. That, along with everything else, informed my faith in a huge way. But God has used her profoundly in my faith journey. I think he helped prepare me for being caregiver and for having a daughter with disabilities, even through the miscarriages, so that I would start to understand who he was before Rachel came along and before I had to deal with something that would last the rest of my life as well. One of the big things when you're a caregiver to a child with disabilities who will never be able to live alone is what's going to happen in her future.
Yeah.
That is something that can send me quickly into a panic if I let it. In the book, I even talk about an episode where I was in a panic and had to call or text people for help to get through that. And I'm not usually like that. I'm usually a fairly controlled people. And the Lord knew that as well. And so what he allowed was, as I'm dealing with this future of my daughter, I was lamenting the fact that I didn't know what we're going to do with her as we continue to get, how long can we care for her? How long will her health last? What do we do when we can't any longer? Do we need to find a place for her now? What kind of place would that be? How do we make sure that they're going to protect her? All of the questions. And I know her brothers absolutely adore her, but that's a lot to ask of them.
Yes,
And
yes.
I know they'll help care for her, but as far as what that looks like, I don't know. But I was lamenting that fact. And then I just started reminding myself that God is bigger than those situations. And I would start saying, but sometimes I forget, Lord, that you are sovereign. You love Rachel, or you are in control of all of everything that's going on. And God, sometimes I forget that you are loving and you love her more than I do. And sometimes I forget that you are gracious and your grace is sufficient for now and will be sufficient for them. I was listed maybe 5 or 6 or something like that. And so that it just kept coming back to me. And I had written that years ago, and it just kept coming back to me. And when I was trying to figure out what the Lord really wanted me to write, it just kept coming up. I thought, it's so easy to forget the Lord's faithfulness. And we're told all the
Yes.
time about his promises. And we hear that over and over. And his promises are so important and wonderful to study. But if we don't know that God is a faithful God, that he is already in our future, if we don't know the characteristic of God, we don't know who he is, how can we trust the promises he makes? So first,
Right.
I think we have it backwards. I think we really need to know who the Lord is before we can start really appreciating his promises and being able to trust in those.
We put together this image of who God is, but it's
Mhm.
often based on our life experience. And so
Yeah.
then we envision a God of our mind that doesn't at all resemble the God who has revealed himself in
Right.
scripture. And so
Right.
those are the attributes that you have focused on. There are
Yeah.
60 of them. So I'm going to ask you a bit of a hard question, but Julie, what would you say are your top 3 when you were writing? What are the ones that came most easily to you as you think about who God is and how he reveals himself in the scriptures, in life experience, through other people?
Yeah. That's a great question. I appreciate the fact that you actually gave me 3. One person asked me to name my top one, and I'm like, I'm cheating.
Oh,
I cannot name a top one.
I reading through, Julie, I couldn't pick mine either. So I'm giving you some good wiggle room because I needed it myself.
Thanks. So first of all, the caveat, you won't completely understand him. The second caveat, we also have to realize it's a part of a whole.
Yes.
He is perfectly God, and he is perfectly, all of his attributes perfectly work together in tandem. So he's never more loving than he is more just. He's never more just than he is more loving. He's never more holy than he is more gracious. So they're all perfect in tandem. That's really important when we start looking at one, because I hear people all the time saying, if he's a sovereign God, then he must not be very good because he allows so much suffering. Or if he's a good God, he must not be very strong or in control because he can't control what's happening. And so I want to first preface with those things. Now, as far as what is my favorite, I would say, or what came easier, I would say the first one I always mention is the sovereignty. God is sovereign. And it's actually, I think, the first chapter of the book.
Yes.
And the reason I pull onto that one is because I did not find that comforting with my first miscarriage. In fact, it angered me. And that's the one I hear so many people throw out when they're suffering.
Yeah, so honest.
Yes.
That's a great place to start because I think every one of our listeners can relate to that. It's that
Yeah.
age-old question. If God is good, then why do bad things happen? We've
Yeah.
all experienced that.
We have to come to a point of surrendering our expectations. And that's how we can start to understand his sovereignty as something that's beautiful. I think it's Johnny Erickson Tata that says something like, the Lord allows what he hates to accomplish what he loves. And what the Lord loves in our life is our salvation. He's after an eternity with us. in eternity with us. I can't say that enough. He wants us with him forever. And this life is but a drop. It's just a vapor, I think is how the Bible puts it, a vapor. To us, it's everything because we are looking at it from our human brain perspective. So this life is so much to us, but it's a vapor in God's eyes. And what he's after is our salvation and wanting us to be with him and wanting other people to be with him and to be glorified. We're created to glorify the Lord.
So how is that connected to God's sovereignty? Help
Yes.
us connect the dots a little bit.
We first have to get to that, but his sovereignty, when I first began to have tragic things happen in my life with the miscarriage, I was in the mindset that so many are. If he is a sovereign God, how can he allow this to happen? I'm either A, not doing the right things, or B, his promises aren't for me. They might be for everybody else, but they're not for me. Or he just doesn't care about me. And so that was the big thing that I wrestled with. But as I've gone through all the suffering, I can see that the sovereignty of God is what can now give me the hope I had. Because combined with all of his other attributes, his sovereignty means that everything that comes to me, he allows for some reason that is somehow good. Now, that doesn't mean what happens is good. A death is not good. God hates death. That's why he claimed victory over it. But his sovereignty doesn't outweigh his goodness. And so all of those attributes together make his sovereignty beautiful. And when I think about the future for my daughter, I can take comfort because he will never be less than sovereign.
Yeah, that is such an important distinction because we do tend to think about the attributes of God in a singular fashion.
Yes.
And so it's easy to dismiss God for some, and why it's also very easy to just accept everything without ever considering or thinking things through.
Okay, you asked for 3. So my second one, his immutability, his unchangeability. So look at his sovereignty from that aspect. If God could change, then something I did today or said today or didn't do today could tick him off. And how scary would that be? But God is unchanging. So his love is never going to be less than it is. His grace is never going to be less. His mercy, his forgiveness is never going to be less than it is. And that makes everything the Lord has done as revealed in scripture even more grounding and more hope-filled because he's unchanging. That is not going to change. God's provided that for us. So we don't have to fear his wrath. His wrath is real. It's not a pretend thing or it didn't go away, but it's been satisfied in Christ for those of us who know him as our Lord and Savior. Another, as you add that to his sovereignty and his unchangeability, all of these things together is a part of our perfect God and part of the reason we have hope in the first place.
What was maybe the hardest chapter for you to write and come to grips with?
That's good. That's a hard one to answer. One that I didn't quite understand. Maybe a different way of putting it is impossible for me to grasp is his impeccability, his sinlessness. That one was probably more difficult to even write about because how do you come up with words to describe a God who's sinless? We don't have the capability of understanding an infathomable God. We can't fully. So that to understand his sinlessness in the context of that also goes along with his immanence, which is his nearness. They almost seem in contradiction in a way. He understands our suffering because he suffered, but yet he never gave into temptation because he's sinless. But the human part of him fully understood what we go through. And so he can relate to us and he can comfort us in our needs.
Yeah.
So they were probably some of the hardest to actually put into a context where I thought the reader could grasp a little bit.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense since none of us has ever experienced a sinless life. It's hard for us to even fathom what that experience is like. But that is precisely why God is God and we are not. One of my show is all about grace. As I quick looked through the table of contents, I immediately looked for the word grace. And of course, there it was, God is gracious on page 60, 61, and 62. And I was struck by a funny story that you told in that chapter about a gift that your brother gave you at Christmas. So, before we go into that, do you mind if I just read a short bit from your chapter and then tell us a little bit about the story of the stick and the rock?
Yeah, please read.
Okay. So this is what you write on page 62. In his abundant and sufficient grace, he works together all things we receive for some good purpose in this world and ultimately in the next. As we continue to unwrap the gift of surrendered faith, some of what looks to be mean and ugly in our lives transforms into precious gifts that stretch, grow, and heal us. When we recognize God's grace in our lives, we see abundant reason to thank God for his unmerited favor, even when we're left with a rock and a stick. So there's a lot to unpack in those few sentences, but tell us first, what's the story of the rock and a stick?
This involved my brother. I have 4 brothers, and this brother was we were the first 4 of us were very close in age. And this brother was just barely a year older than me. And so didn't always get along growing up. But I always
Imagine.
yeah, but I always knew my brothers had my back. They would have defended me if I needed defending for sure. But I was also the brunt of some of their picking as well. So with anybody with siblings, especially if you have brothers, you know how that works. Comes with the territory. We always exchanged gifts at Christmas, and my brother told me he got my name, and he told me for months that I was getting a rock and a stick. And I'm like, yeah, you're not going to give me a rock and a stick. I know better than that. And so go back and forth. And sure enough, that Christmas Eve when we exchanged gifts and I opened, what did I get but a rock and a stick?
Can't even believe it. Oh my
Uh-huh,
goodness.
uh-huh. I was taken aback for a few minutes, but then I kind of knew there was going to be more to it than that. And sure
At
enough,
least you were
later,
hoping, right?
yeah, I was
You're a woman of
hoping he would have
hope,
been in
so
big trouble. He still had to live with
yes.
me, so he would have been in big trouble. But later on, he gave me one of my favorite albums, and but it was something I had always remembered, and it's created some. It's such a fun memory. My both of my parents passed in 2023, just within 4 months of each other, and it's been an extremely hard 2 years. The Lord has allowed things in our life, and those things, as we look back, we can't in the moment they look like a rock and a stick. They look like things that are not good for us or that aren't going to be good. But just like I can look back now fondly on that memory and think I can also look back on what God has allowed, the things that I didn't think were so good. There was a
Mhm.
time when I totally lost it. I had 2 little boys. My daughter was about 4 and still had not was not walking and was not talking. And we had a little boy who was a year old. So my plate was full and I was overwhelmed. And we went to some training to help with Rachel. And it was all about focusing on the parents, which was God knew we needed this. He exposed me to this training. He exposed me to a counselor that was there at this training. And it was exactly what, and I broke down. I never wept so hard in my entire life. I was so broken at that point, Jennifer. But that's exactly what I needed. The Lord had to
Mhm.
break me in order for me to realize that I couldn't control everything and I didn't have the strength to handle it. And it was that breaking that allowed him in. Um,
Yes.
and
Yes.
now I look back on that, just like I look back on the rock and the stick my brother gave me with such fond memories. I look back at that. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful the Lord did that for me, not to me, but for me.
Julie, tell us for anyone who's listening, what advice or what practical help would you give to someone who's really struggling to hold on to hope because they are in the midst of some very painful, very difficult circumstance? What are some of those practices that you've engaged in your own life that would help someone who's struggling be able to take that step toward hope when they're feeling stuck?
That's a great question and a very practical one to ask. I think one of the first things that I want to say is it is okay to be broken. It is okay to grieve. And you need to do that. You don't beat yourself up over it. And if all you can muster is Jesus, if that's all you can muster for your prayer, that's enough. But hold that prayer. If all you can say is, God help, that's enough. But hold on to that prayer because God is a God of possibility. And when you're in your grief, you can't see it. I know you can't see it, but he is there and he is making possibility out of your impossible situation. So hold that. The other thing I would say is, what helps you just relax a little bit? Taking a walk? Is it getting outside? Is it putting on some music? Something that really, when I don't even have a word to say, when I can't even say, Lord,
Mhm.
help,
Mhm.
hymns are something that is so soothing to me. And I can put it on. I don't have to sing to it, but I can put it on
Mhm.
and it ministers to me. That's another one. Even if you can't read a word in the word because you're so broken, have it open. Have it open.
Mm.
The
Mhm.
Lord's word is so sharp and so active and working in your lives. So even if you can't read the words on
Mm.
it because the tears are flowing so much, have it open. He's imparting to you his love and his truth. Just for
Mhm.
that, seek community. Don't
Mm.
isolate. Please, please don't isolate. I am a good isolator, and I probably would have, my faith would have been stronger much sooner had I let other people in. But I thought I had to do it myself. So
That's
don't.
a really that's one I think that a lot of our listeners will be able to relate to, because that's our immediate response is to withdraw. Because what do we see every day? We see the Pinterest feed or the Instagram feed, the scroll, the TV program, the movie, all of those things that show us what we are not experiencing in our life. And so our natural tendency then is to withdraw, to go hide, and to move ourselves away so that it's not so obvious that we are not where everybody else is.
Yeah.
How have you found community yourself, especially when you felt like you didn't have the energy to be
Yeah.
giving out and putting out?
Like I said, I'm not a poster child for that. I'm not very good at it, honestly. But what I did was I created it, honestly. What really helped me was my oldest son was starting to go to school, and I'm very nervous about him going. He went to a private school for his first year, and then he was going into a public school, and I was very nervous about that. And so I met with a couple other moms, and we started praying for him. It wasn't even praying for my situation, but it's the fact that we were praying. So my eyes were off of my situation onto a different situation, and that really helped. And it brought me then into fellowship with God, not necessarily about over my same situation or the things that I was hurting the most over. The Lord doesn't distinguish between that. If we're going to him in prayer, he's imparting what we need. It's not just, oh, I'm just going to answer that one little thing. No, he knows what's in our heart and what we need. So he's
Right.
ministering to that as well. So that was one of the things I did. Because my daughter does not have a diagnosis, I can't go to a Down syndrome support group or a autism support group. So there wasn't really such a thing out there for me. So I got together with a counselor at school, and I love to help people. And because, like I said, I don't want to be on the receiving end of that help. I want to be the one helping. So I formed the support group, which what it did to me, it helped me because I was then able to discuss things with other people. So we had a
For
support
sure.
group for school. And then I wanted to start telling people about my story just within the school system about Rachel and how they could best help her. So I went to a program that helps teach you how to speak about it and to tell our story and the importance of my daughter and those with disabilities and what they can teach us and how they can minister to us. And that also ministered to me. So if you are someone who does not receive help or does not receive if you're the giver, then continue to be the giver. It will minister to you. You don't have to stop doing that. Even if it's in a different direction, it's going to minister to you. And you were mentioning, and I think you're so right on this, that we see all the Pinterest things out there, oh, the picture perfect lives over there, and we don't think we can speak. I think there's another reason we don't seek community, and I think that's because we don't think our suffering, in some cases, is bad enough. We compare ourselves, and we say, people are going to get sick of hearing about it. People are not going to want to hear me whine about my woes again. They're not going to want to be around me. But then the second aspect of that is I have a child with disabilities, but medically she is very stable. How can I even speak out about it or complain about it or talk about it? Because that person over there, they're on a feeding tube, they're on a ventilator, they're coding all the time, and they have all this horrible stuff to go on. How can I speak into a special need community? And that's been a real thing for me because my daughter with disabilities isn't as involved as other people's child with disabilities. But that is dangerous. So don't compare your circumstances to someone else. Your suffering is real. It matters. It matters to God. It matters to other people. It matters in your world. So do not belittle what you're going through. It's real, and you need to accept that and own it. But then you need to talk about it and share it with community and not feel like your voice isn't worth hearing or it's not bad enough.
And I think it goes back to another thing that you said earlier, that when our focus is solely on ourselves, we're always going to come up short. But if our focus is on a God who has chosen us and called us by name, then if we truly come to believe that, then no matter what has come our way, we come to learn that's important to God too. And so it levels the playing field, right? It
Yeah.
takes away that my suffering is not as severe or involved as yours is. I've had 2 miscarriages, but you've had 3. And so that
Yeah.
means therefore when our focus is on a God who is loving and faithful and kind and just and gracious and immutable and soft, when our
Keep
focus
going.
is there, then he will come to indwell us with what we most need, regardless of what our neighbor most needs in their moment. Julie, this has been a really great conversation. What I'm hearing in terms of next steps toward hope, that prayer is a big one, and seeking community, or if that's a little tricky for you, to build community and to recognize that in the process of building community, you also will be receiving to some measure what you are giving out.
Oh,
And then
absolutely.
also to take some time to care for our bodies. Brain science is teaching us all the time that what we do with our bodies impacts how our minds process information. And so if we can get our bodies out there moving, there's space to be able to give over the things that are hard, to be able to process those things. Whereas if we're just stewing and sitting carefully and quietly, if you will, in our own space, we cut off an invitation from God to express what's really there and then to be able to receive from him what he so wants to be able to give us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that you summarized it really well. And I broadly stroke it as the first thing we need to do is let go of what we expect life to be like. And we can't always do that in the middle of the acute trauma that we're experiencing. But as we start to let have our Bible open, cry out to God in our pain, as we start to do those things and continue to open up the possibilities that God is going to do some things in your circumstances, then I think we can start to let go of what we might think that should look like. What are you going to do with this now, Lord? He's a God of
Yeah.
possibilities. He can meet any impossibility and make a possibility in it. So we can let go of those expectations. And then we need to look back. I think that's really important too, to look back and see God's hand where we couldn't see it before. I think I'm not the best prayer journaler in the world, but I think it's a wonderful practice because then you can actually tangibly see God's answers to those prayers, because some people are so good about that. They write down their prayers, they record their prayers, and then they record the answers to those prayers. So you can physically look back and see that. But even when, like you said, taking care of your bodies and getting that physical exercise, it's so important. Like I know people who go through clinical depression. That's one of the things that want to stay active. You don't always feel like it, but you have to get out there and get moving, because as we get out and get moving and exercise our bodies and take care of our bodies, the faithfulness of God will come back to us. And then the last thing is to look up and to not focus on our circumstances, but focus on him. That makes all the difference in the world when we can get to that point, because then when another challenge hits, which it will, if we live long enough, we're going to continue to have challenges. When it will, like with my parents, I'm grieving. I'm still grieving not having my parents in my life, but it's such a more, if it makes sense, a contented grief. Like,
I love
grieving with
that.
hope.
Yes. It's grieving with hope. That's
Yeah,
the
and
difference.
it's all about, and I feel a peace and a contentment within my griefs that of course I miss them in my life. Of course I do, but I can trust God. I can look up and see that he's always been faithful. Why would he not be now? And as a perfect God, he will continue to be. And if I'm not seeing it, it's either it's not time for me to see it, or I haven't released my expectations enough so I can see his possibility.
I love too that in terms of those expectations, we can ask God to help us with them, because it doesn't happen As you alluded to earlier, it's not something that happens overnight, that our expectations get immediately transformed and everything is great. But we need to ask for his help even in that. Julie, I have loved our conversation today. Tell our listeners, where can they find you?
Yeah, I have a website. It's juliesunny.com. I'm also on most of the socials except for TikTok. It's either Julie Sunny 1 or Julie Sunny. So you can find me anywhere there. We need community, and I would love for you to join me. I have some freebies. I have a free library, and there's free download right away when you subscribe. I have a newsletter that comes out usually once a month.
Thank you, Julie. And thank you for, I apologize. I just realized I said your last name incorrectly at the beginning.
No
Sunny.
problem.
That's a great word for
Thank
you
you.
and your book of hope. Oh, my
Thank you.
goodness.
No worries. I don't take offense at that at all. You actually did.
Oh, that's very gracious. I will make sure to put everything down in the show notes so that you can find Julie Sunny and all of her freebies and resources. And Julie, I like to finish my episodes with something that makes you giggle. I believe grace grows in the giggles and in the lightheartedness of life. So what's something that makes you giggle these days?
I would say when I'm around people who can laugh at themselves, like they could make a joke at their own expense. I love that when someone is confident in who their Lord is, that they can joke on their mess ups. And maybe it's because I mess up so much that it's fun to see. It just makes everything so much better when you can take yourself lightly.
It does. And it's so relatable, isn't it? I love that. That's really good. Thank you, friend, my new friend. This has been an absolute privilege to have you. And I'm so glad you've been part of Living the Grace Life. Thanks for coming.
Oh, this was so fun. Thank you.
Gosh, that was such a great conversation. So much of that I could relate to, right? How easy is it for us to forget who God is and therefore who we are when our eyes are focused more on our circumstances? So I hope as we inch our way a little bit closer to Christmas, that regardless of what's unfolding around you, you'll remember that God is for you and He's with you. It's why He came. And it's not too late to download your free copy of my mini devotional, Making Room for the Quieter Voices of Christmas. You can find the link for that in the show notes below. I just wanted to give you a little heads up about the next 2 weeks on the podcast. We're going to focus primarily on the 2 narratives of Jesus' birth. First, in the Gospel of Matthew next week, and then on Christmas Eve, the Gospel of Luke. Friends, I can't wait to celebrate this Christmas with you. I'm so glad you were part of our conversation today. If this episode has encouraged you or grown your grace and your faith in Jesus, then would you be willing to share this with a friend? And if you're not already following or subscribing, then please do so you don't miss an episode. As always, you can find me at jennifersakata.com, on Instagram at Jennifer Sakata, or on Facebook at jennifersakata.author. Until next time, live the grace life generously, friend. Grace for you, grace for them.